My name is Jade Mercer. I am 29 years old, and 3 days ago, while I was lighting birthday candles in my own backyard and trying to keep frosting off my 4-year-old son's fingers, the man who decided I was no longer his responsibility at 15 walked through my gate like he still belonged in my life. I had not seen him in 14 years. Not at my high school graduation. Not at my college ceremony. Not at my wedding, not when my son was born, not on a single birthday that mattered. He had been absent for every moment that required something real from him, but on the one afternoon that was supposed to belong entirely to my child, balloons on the fence, juice boxes in the cooler, kids losing their minds on an inflatable slide in the yard, he appeared with a gift bag and the expression of a man who believed time automatically erased what he had done. I want to tell you exactly what happened that afternoon. I want to tell you what he said, what I said, and what arrived in my mailbox 2 days later in a legal envelope with my name typed across the front. But first, let me take you back 14 years, so you understand why seeing him standing in the middle of my backyard near my son's birthday cake did not make me want to cry. It made me go completely still, because I recognized immediately, the way you recognize something your body learned long before your mind caught up, that he had not come to make peace. He had come because he needed something. And whatever it was, he had decided my backyard on my son's birthday was the appropriate place to ask for it. He was wrong about that. He was wrong about several things that afternoon. Before I tell you exactly what he wanted, and what happened when I refused, tell me this. What time is it where you are right now? And where in the world are you watching from? I want to know how far this story travels before it finds the people who need it most. When I was 15, I learned that being abandoned does not always sound the way you expect it to. My parents had been divorced for 2 years by then. My father had moved into a new house, settled into a new routine, and built what looked from the outside like a new version of himself, one that had no obvious room for the daughter who reminded him of the life he had decided to leave behind. I kept telling myself it was temporary. That he was adjusting. That once things settled, he would remember I was still there. Still a teenager, still someone who needed a parent. Then one Thursday evening in October, he stood in the kitchen with his car keys in his hand and told me in a voice that was completely calm, which was the worst part of it, that I needed to start figuring things out on my own. He said he was done carrying me. He said it the way someone might say they were canceling a service they no longer needed. Efficient. Final. Almost bored, I asked where I was supposed to go. He said I was smart enough to figure that out. I asked about school. About money. About the basic fact that I was 15 and legally not old enough to do most of what he was describing. He told me I had always been dramatic. He gave me 2 weeks. 2 weeks to gather my things, stop making his life complicated, and disappear into whatever future I could manage on my own. I spent that night barely sleeping. The next day at school I moved through every class like I was underwater. And by the second afternoon I broke down in the parking lot and my best friend found me crying so hard I could not speak clearly. I told her enough for her to understand. That conversation changed my life. Her parents did what my father would not. They listened. They asked questions. They looked shocked in the right places, and then they said I could stay with them while we figured out the next steps. I carried a duffel bag into their guest room and said thank you so many times they had to tell me to stop. I finished high school from that house. I got a part-time job at a coffee shop and worked evenings and weekends. I learned how to smile through exhaustion, how to count tips efficiently, how to keep moving through heartbreak by building routine around it. The family I stayed with, I will call them the Waltons, never once treated me like charity. They treated me like a teenager who deserved structure, dinner, and a safe place to sleep. That sounds basic until you have gone without it. My father never called to ask if I had gotten to school. He never asked about winter clothes or parent meetings or anything that required him to acknowledge I still existed and still needed things. Once or twice there was a brief message, something vague about hoping I was doing well, but even those felt less like care than image maintenance. By 18, I had stopped waiting for him to become someone different. I took community college classes because that was what I could afford. I transferred later. I made one practical decision after another, not because the path was easy, but because it was mine, and no one could take it from me. I did not get rescued. I got disciplined. I got careful with hope. I got very good at building things slowly and protecting them once they were built. That is the part of my history you need to understand before I tell you what happened in the backyard, because what he walked into that afternoon was not a woman who had been waiting for him to come back. It was the life he had once decided I did not deserve, and I had built it anyway, without him, one quiet choice at a time. The morning of my son's birthday was exactly the kind of morning I had once dreamed about from a guest room that was not mine. My husband Daniel was at the grill by 11. Music was playing through a speaker on the patio. I was tying balloons to the fence while trying to stop our son from getting into the frosting before a single guest arrived. The yard was a little uneven, the chairs were mismatched, and there were already toys migrating toward every corner of the lawn. It was perfect. Our neighbors came. Parents from daycare came. 2 colleagues brought their kids. The Waltons arrived, Linda with a bag of gift wrap and the same warm energy she had carried for 30 years. Greg with folding chairs. He had apparently decided were his personal contribution to every event I held. That is what chosen family looks like. The people who stayed. The people who built alongside you. The people who never made you audition for their care. Around 1:30, while kids were racing across the yard and adults were laughing near the grill, I heard the side gate open. Something in my body tightened before I fully processed what I was seeing. He looked older. More gray at the temples. Heavier through the middle. But I knew him before I finished the thought. My father stood in the middle of my backyard holding a gift bag with cartoon tissue paper, looking at my son with the relaxed entitlement of someone who believed his presence was automatically welcome. My son laughed at something across the yard. My father smiled at him like he had every right in the world to be there. I did not run toward him. I did not make a scene. Motherhood had changed something in me. When you have a child, your fear becomes less interesting than your instincts. My first thought was not about 14 years of silence. It was about control. How close was he to my son? How many people were watching? Whether he would behave like a reasonable adult for 5 minutes or detonate the afternoon the moment he opened his mouth. He lifted the gift bag slightly and said, "There she is." Then he looked past me at my son and said, "And there is my grandson." That word, grandson, landed wrong immediately. Not because it was technically inaccurate. Because of the ownership wrapped around it. He did not ask. He claimed. Daniel had already noticed the change in my expression. He walked over from the grill, put a hand lightly at my back, and said hello in that steady voice of his that can welcome or warn depending entirely on what you have earned. My father introduced himself as if we were all meeting under completely normal circumstances. I told my son to stay by the slide with his friends, and I walked toward the far corner of the yard near the fence. My father followed. Up close I could smell stale stress beneath cheap cologne. He looked me over the way people do when they are assessing whether your life is worth something to them. Then he said he knew I had probably been upset for a long time and he understood I had always been sensitive, but he hoped enough time had passed for me to let it go. I did not laugh. But I noticed how confidently he had replaced what he did with how I had responded to it. He said he had heard I was doing well. Nice house. Good husband. Good neighborhood. He said I looked happy, then he told me he was in financial difficulty and needed my help. Not a small favor. Not a temporary loan, $50,000. He said it quickly, the way people say things they hope will sound more reasonable at speed. I asked him to repeat it. He did, this time with supporting details. A business arrangement that had collapsed. Partners who had turned on him. The market. Obligations. He needed to move fast. I looked at him steadily. He read my silence as an opening and kept talking. He said I was in a position to do something meaningful for him. Meaningful. That word still makes something tighten in my chest. Then he did something that told me exactly where this conversation had always been heading. He reminded me that he had once provided a roof and food. That raising a child cost money and sacrifice. That perhaps it was now my turn to give something back. I asked him, very clearly, if he was genuinely standing in my backyard during my son's birthday party attempting to invoice me retroactively for the basic cost of my existence as his daughter. He frowned and said I was getting emotional. He looked older. More gray at the temples. Heavier through the middle. But I knew him before I finished the thought. My father stood in the middle of my backyard holding a gift bag with cartoon tissue paper, looking at my son with the relaxed entitlement of someone who believed his presence was automatically welcome. My son laughed at something across the yard. My father smiled at him like he had every right in the world to be there. I did not run toward him. I did not make a scene. Motherhood had changed something in me. When you have a child, your fear becomes less interesting than your instincts. My first thought was not about 14 years of silence. It was about control. How close was he to my son? How many people were watching? Whether he would behave like a reasonable adult for 5 minutes or detonate the afternoon the moment he opened his mouth. He lifted the gift bag slightly and said, "There she is." Then he looked past me at my son and said, "And there is my grandson." That word, grandson, landed wrong immediately. Not because it was technically inaccurate. Because of the ownership wrapped around it. He did not ask. He claimed Daniel had already noticed the change in my expression. He walked over from the grill, put a hand lightly at my back, and said hello in that steady voice of his that can welcome or warn depending entirely on what you have earned. My father introduced himself as if we were all meeting under completely normal circumstances. I told my son to stay by the slide with his friends, and I walked toward the far corner of the yard near the fence. My father followed. Up close I could smell stale stress beneath cheap cologne. He looked me over the way people do when they are assessing whether your life is worth something to them. Then he said he knew I had probably been upset for a long time and he understood I had always been sensitive, but he hoped enough time had passed for me to let it go. I did not laugh. But I noticed how confidently he had replaced what he did with how I had responded to it. He said he had heard I was doing well. Nice house. Good husband. Good neighborhood. He said I looked happy, then he told me he was in financial difficulty and needed my help. Not a small favor. Not a temporary loan, $50,000, he said it quickly, the way people say things they hope will sound more reasonable at speed. I asked him to repeat it. He did, this time with supporting details. A business arrangement that had collapsed. Partners who had turned on him. The market. Obligations. He needed to move fast. I looked at him steadily. He read my silence as an opening and kept talking. He said I was in a position to do something meaningful for him. Meaningful. That word still makes something tighten in my chest. Then he did something that told me exactly where this conversation had always been heading. He reminded me that he had once provided a roof and food. That raising a child cost money and sacrifice. That perhaps it was now my turn to give something back. I asked him, very clearly, if he was genuinely standing in my backyard during my son's birthday party attempting to invoice me retroactively for the basic cost of my existence as his daughter. He frowned and said I was getting emotional. He said he was only asking for what was fair. Then he lowered his voice and told me that if I was unwilling to help him voluntarily, he was prepared to pursue other options. Legal options. There were family matters, he said, that I would not want dragged into a courtroom. Something settled in my chest at that moment. Not softened. Settled. The last fragment of uncertainty about who he was dissolved completely, right there near the fence with children laughing 30 feet away. I looked him in the eye and said, "You have 5 minutes to leave my property." He did not leave gracefully. He tried to reframe what he had just said as a misunderstanding. He told me I was overreacting. He tried to angle toward the back door of the house, not quickly, not dramatically, just deliberately, the way people move when they have decided your boundaries are negotiable. I stepped in front of him. He told me I was acting unstable. I told him to leave. He said any decent daughter would hear her father out. I said he had 5 minutes and they were running. Daniel had started toward us the moment he saw my father angle toward the house. Linda noticed. I could feel the atmosphere of the yard shifting. that particular adult tension that children sense before they understand. My father noticed the audience forming, and instead of retreating, he straightened his shoulders like a man preparing a performance. He said loudly that he was only trying to have a private conversation with his daughter and did not appreciate being treated like an intruder. That was when I understood he was trying to use my own good manners against me. He moved to step around me. I caught his wrist and stopped him, not to hurt him, to stop him, to make it physically impossible for him to take one more step toward my child or my home. He jerked back in surprise. When he finally pulled free, there was already color blooming under the skin where my fingers had been. He looked at his wrist with the expression of a man who had just discovered a useful prop. He started saying I had assaulted him. He said he had only come to make peace. He said I was unstable. What that accomplished was confirming, to every adult standing close enough to hear, exactly the kind of person he was. Linda spoke first and said nobody in that yard was confused about what was happening. Greg stood up slowly from his folding chair with the particular calm of a man who does not need volume to end something. My father looked around and understood that the room he had imagined controlling did not exist. It was my backyard, full of people who knew me, and that mattered more than biology ever had. Daniel told him to leave immediately. My father pointed at me and said this was not over. Then he backed toward the gate, still holding his wrist, and left with whatever remained of his dignity dissolving in the grass behind him. 2 days later, I opened my mailbox and found an envelope from a law office with my name on the front. The letter accused me of withholding $50,000 through prior family assets and undocumented financial arrangements. It suggested damages. It implied deceit. It was written in the polished, bloodless language designed to make fiction sound expensive. I stood in the driveway and felt the last thread of hesitation disappear. He had not retreated. He had doubled down. He had found an attorney willing to put lies on official letterhead and mail them to the woman he had abandoned at 15. By noon the same day, we had a consultation scheduled with our own attorney. I will call her Andrea, sharp, practical, and completely unimpressed by intimidation dressed up as legal correspondence. She read the letter, asked several direct questions, and said, "This is weak. This is sloppy. And this is not about law. It is about pressure." She told me that people like my father counted on emotional history to do the work that evidence could not. They assumed shame and fatigue would push the other party toward a quiet settlement just to make the problem stop. Then she asked if I had any records from my teenage years. Memory open drawers I had kept closed for a long time, old emails from school. An emergency contact form listing Linda's family, not my father. Tax records from early jobs. College financial aid paperwork showing 0 parental contribution. Messages from a cousin acknowledging that everyone had known my father had essentially walked away and left me to manage on my own. Linda had memories. Greg had memories. The documentation that had always existed in pieces was suddenly a coherent record of everything he had spent years pretending had not happened. Our dining room table became a workspace, folders, timelines. A clear and organized account of the actual facts that made his claim look exactly as hollow as it was. We were not building an emotional case. We were building a factual wall that left no room for reinterpretation. While we were doing that, he started calling from blocked numbers. Andrea told me to save every voicemail. One in particular mattered. In it, he said he had hoped he would not have to involve lawyers, but that I had left him no choice after embarrassing him in front of everyone at the party. There it was, not a legal argument, not a claim about money he believed was his. Retaliation. Said almost in his own words. He was angry because I had refused him publicly and he had lost face in a yard full of people he had never earned. Andrea said it would not win everything on its own. But it revealed motive with a clarity that was difficult to argue around. Around the same time, I made a decision that would have frightened the 15-year-old version of me. I wrote a calm, direct statement on my personal social media page. No dramatics. No insults. Just the facts, that the man who had cut me off as a teenager had appeared uninvited at my son's birthday, demanded $50,000, threatened legal action when I refused, and was now pursuing a false claim after over a decade of abandoning any real parental responsibility. I attached nothing private about my son. I did not tell people what to think. I simply told the truth in the way adults tell it when they are finally done being afraid of how unflattering it makes someone else look. The responses began faster than I expected. Former classmates, neighbors, parents from my son's daycare. People who had known pieces of the story separately and were now seeing it whole for the first time. One message came from a woman he had been in a relationship with. Her message was short and careful. She said she had not understood the full picture until now. She thanked me for being factual, a week after Andrea sent our formal response, rejecting every claim, demanding all contact go through legal representation, and noting the absence of any legitimate foundation. His side asked to discuss quiet dismissal. We were done being quiet. Andrea pushed for a full and unconditional withdrawal, written confirmation that no further claims would be pursued, and reimbursement of legal costs connected to the filing. They resisted. Then they folded. There was no case. There had never been a case. There had only been pressure, and a calculated bet that I would still fold under it the way I had folded at 15. The claim was withdrawn. The calls stopped. The letters stopped, and because he could not bear the damage spreading through his own circles, he posted a public statement about regrettable misunderstandings and wishing our family peace. It was not an apology. It was a reputation repair. But by then it no longer mattered. People knew. Relationships around him shifted. The access he had counted on, the access that comes from being a parent, from sharing blood, from believing that time automatically earns you back what you threw away, was gone. He did not lose because I was louder than him. He lost because I stopped protecting him from the consequences of who he had always been. Life settled after that. Not overnight, but consistently. My son remembers the balloons and the cake and the inflatable slide and the toy trucks he unwrapped in the backyard. He does not remember the man at the gate. I intend to keep it that way for as long as I possibly can. The lesson in all of this is not that revenge has to be loud to be real. Sometimes the strongest thing you can do is stand still, document the truth, and refuse to let someone rewrite the damage they caused just because time has passed and they have decided inconvenient things should be forgotten. Family is not defined by who made you. It is defined by who protected you, who stayed, who told you that you mattered when it would have been easier and more comfortable to walk away. You are allowed to close the door on people who only remember you when they need something from you. You are allowed to choose the life you built over the guilt of disappointing people who never chose you. And you are allowed to stand in your own backyard with your child's birthday cake in front of you and say, "This is mine." You do not get to walk in here and take from it. I am not 15 anymore, and neither, finally, is the version of me that used to wait for him to come back.